Once you learn how to get out of your head and into your body and connect to your breath during pleasure, then you move that into sexual arousal with genital touch. So you're still connecting to that breath, but now you might start with that body mapping, that kind of foreplay of like, okay, I'm gonna connect to my body, and then start with a technique called edging, which would be bringing yourself up to the point close to ejaculation and then slowing down and letting your arousal fall and then ramping back up again.
One of the things that's so fascinating to me about this subject of sex and men is how much men talk about and obviously innately desire sex, but how much we get wrong about it and all of the misunderstandings that go on behind engaging in something that could actually be not only fun, but a way to connect with women, a way to build connection and intimacy. We just don't talk about it. And I'm wondering why that is.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much shame associated with sex. And I think there's this like understanding or, perception that men should know everything about sex and be good at it, no matter what. And no one teaches us how to do it. So it's one of those things where there's this expectation, but there's really no reason for men to be super comfortable having sex or talking about sex. And, it's just such a taboo in our society, especially among other men. You're not going to go into a group conversation with men and it would be normal for someone to be like, all right, I had trouble, in the bedroom last night.
Right.
Just
it's not
happen.
A thing that we want to talk about for sure. But I've got a lot of questions on this, but one of the questions that came up is you said men generally are expected to just know everything and be good at sex. But what does that mean? What does it mean to be good at sex? How would you define that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think that expectation and perception comes from what we see in porn. So
Absolutely.
That might be a false perception, right? So I think our baseline is that, hey, the best men at sex are porn stars. So that's what I'm going for. That's what good sex looks like. I can go hard and fast for a long time and I can satisfy my partner. So that I think is the first like false premise of what it means to be good at sex. And that's a big pressure and big shoes to fill to try and emulate porn, because they are performers.
Performers with multiple cuts. They're not probably satisfying their partner, so to speak. And then there's the other aspect I've heard a lot about, which is, men will start comparing themselves to these other men who are well endowed, and that creates a lot of maybe shyness or embarrassment about their own physical makeup.
That was certainly my experience before I was ever sexually active. I watched porn very young, and I hadn't even hit puberty yet. So I'm like waiting for my anatomy to look like theirs. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's not what I have. So how am I going to pleasure a woman? Or a girl at that point? How am I going to be able to be good in bed? So for sure, that started for me before I ever did anything. I had performance anxiety.
How would you suggest, I mean, obviously there's porn, there's the over-sexualization of just about everything under the sun, which is weird because we started this conversation off with the premise of not really talking about it, not really being exposed to it, but we're inundated with it. I would just say an unhealthy form of sexuality versus healthy. So what would you say is a healthier perspective of being quote unquote good in the bedroom or good at sex?
Well, if you're trying to emulate porn, you're in a performance mindset. So you're trying to be something. And to me, what would be a good sexual experience would be deep connection to myself and the ability to be present with my partner. So if I'm trying to hit the mark and be a certain thing and just be ready for sex and turn it on, I'm not really there. Maybe I'm thinking of something else. Maybe I'm thinking of porn to try and get hard or stay hard. Whereas to me, a better experience would be, no, I know exactly what I want and need. I know what it means to feel safe in the bedroom. I can ask for what I want. And then I have this deep connection to myself and my breath. That leads to the best experiences.
When you say safety in the bedroom, I don't think that's a term that we would generally or typically associate with men saying or thinking. I think that would be more commonly referred to or linked with what a woman might be feeling in the bedroom. She has to feel safe emotionally, obviously physically safe. There's that risk as well. Is that something when you talk with the men that you work with that they want, is safety in the bedroom? And what does that actually look like for a man, generally speaking?
Yeah, well, let's take a scenario. For example, if a partner is like grabbing at me and is just like, hey, I want sex now, and is trying to force their way onto me, that's not going to feel safe for me. I'm going to feel kind of used, like, oh, you just want, my penis to get off, or, you're demanding it. That wouldn't feel good. So for me, I would pause that and be like, hey, can you touch me like this instead? Can we slow down? Can you kiss me here, right? And this is one of those myths and expectations that like men just want sex all the time, no matter what. And that you should just be ready and available for sex whenever your partner or wife wants it. And it's simply not true. There's so many scenarios where that would be feeling unsafe. It's like, hey, we only have 5 minutes until, we're getting ready for the thing. Like, hey, I want you. It's like, well, I'm not ready for this. I don't want this. But I need to now get myself prepared, and I should be hard already. It's a huge ask. And I think most men don't realize that that's, not what they want, not what they should want.
I mean, but let's be honest also, the quickie is not a bad thing either, though. I mean, there are obviously circumstances and situations where you can make it spontaneous and fun and exciting, and it doesn't always have to be that same way of doing things in the same places, in the same positions, too.
100%. There's nothing wrong with a quickie. It's only if that's your only option, only opportunity is this pressured situation. If that makes you feel unsafe too. If you're like, hey, yeah, I want a quickie, let's do this, then that can be a beautiful experience. But
Right.
if it feels like the only thing that's offered to you is like, hey, just do your thing, be quick, that doesn't, I don't feel wanted. I don't feel like my partner really desires me. And that's what I want to feel during sex.
Yeah. It is interesting. I heard somebody say, I think it was Matt Walsh, and he was talking about sex work in particular being nothing more than living, breathing, masturbatory tools. And I think that's part of what pornography has done, is it's just commoditized. I didn't even say that word. The act of sex versus the connection and the intimacy that could otherwise be there.
Yeah, it's definitely not good for our connection to ourselves. Your eyes are on a screen, your hands are on your genitals, you're watching other people have a sexual experience. None of that translates to like deep connection to your own body or your partner. So it's a very bad kind of training tool that sets us off on the wrong path of having good sexual experiences.
Well, not to mention just the bad training tool, as you say, but also, I mean, it leads to all sorts of things, performance issues with erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation, all of these other issues that more and more men are confronted with because of their regular use of pornography and masturbation.
Yeah, 100%. I think of myself, we're training ourselves at such a young age to, we don't want to get caught by our parents or guardians, and we're doing it in secret and having this fear and anxiety and shame associated with sex immediately. And that gets really imprinted on us.
Well, this might be a bit of a tangent. I don't know if we want to address this right now, but I'm thinking about that because, regardless, depending on which type of environment you grew up in, it could have, I would say if it was maybe more of a conservative environment, you're going to have a different perspective than somebody who might be growing up in more of a liberal environment around sexuality or exploring your body, that sort of thing. But then also there's the religious side of it as well. And it's really interesting because I've talked with so many men and women too who were shamed about don't have sex before you're married, don't do this, don't do that, be ashamed of it, hide like you're saying. And then all of a sudden you get married and it's like, go, start having all the babies, do everything. And it's like, whoa, I still think this is bad because nobody told me now it's good. And I've talked with a lot of men who deal with that.
Yeah. Absolutely. I work with a lot of men who have that experience, and it's some deep layers to get through and realize that, hey, no, this is okay. This is my body. I'm allowed to do this. And you can still have faith in your religion and not prescribe to those types of certain things.
So that leads me to the question I wanted to ask about that, which again is a little bit of a tangent and we might come back to something else down the road, but regardless of how you grew up in that environment, hopefully men have a more healthy perspective of sex now into their late 20s, 30s, 40s, and on. But how do you talk with your kids about this? I've got 4 kids, 3 boys and a girl, and I've had conversations, appropriate conversations, age-relevant conversations with all 4 of them. But how do you suggest you talk with them in a way that lets them know these things are natural and good and healthy if funneled through the right channels and done the right way with a level of respect and appreciation for you and a potential partner?
Yeah, first, I just want to say I don't have experience with this. I don't have children. So I'll do my best to share what I think I would say. But yeah, it really does depend on the ages. The first thing is as they're younger, being able to reinforce that when they're touching themselves and exploring and understanding pleasure at a very young age, maybe they're 3 or 4, that like, hey, that's okay, but that's something we do in private, and not something, because that first instance of get your hands out of your pants, you shouldn't be doing that, can be like that first source of shame for a person around pleasure and sexuality. So being able to say like, hey, is everything okay down there? If that is something you like to do, that's something we do in private. Later on, if you're talking about, healthy masturbation habits, I think that's always going to be an uncomfortable conversation for like a child to hear from their dad or mother. But I think it's a worthy pursuit. And I think it's, I grew up in that very liberal environment, and I still had a lot of shame around sexuality from my porn use and whatnot. But being able to have that uncomfortable conversation with your child about like, hey, like it's okay to look at porn, but it's not the best option. It's not something that is real. It's, you can start to explore how those things impacted you and that you tried it and it felt good, but maybe it isn't the best way. I think there's ways of explaining it through your own experience where you can validate them and also teach them.
So, but you said something, and I took I took issue with, is you had said, hey, it's okay if you look at porn. You would say that if you had children, you would be okay with that?
Even right now, I don't think looking at porn is the devil. I think it's not good for you. Just like I don't think having, alcohol is good for you. But if you have one drink, I don't think you're a bad person. So like having that urge to watch the most sexually gratifying thing in the world that's so readily available to you, like I wouldn't shame my kid for doing that. I would be like, hey, I totally understand why you tried to watch that and want to watch that. But, you know, it didn't work out well for me, and I would hate to see that happen to you. And these are some better options.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would resonate more with that rather than saying, oh, it's okay if you want to look at porn. The same way I wouldn't say to my child, hey, it's okay that you have one cigarette, or it's okay that you have one drink. It's not appropriate. But also to your point about making it a bad person, yeah, engaging in those behaviors doesn't automatically make you a bad person. And I think that's where the shame comes in. So, you know, conversations I've had is around, hey, look, I understand, to your point, your natural desires and urges, especially as my two oldest boys get older, to want to look at the female body. Of course, you're attracted to that. That's good and healthy. But let me tell you why you need to refrain from doing that. Not only because is it making it a commodity. That's probably a better way to say it than I tried to say it earlier, because I don't know how to say the other word.
Commoditize, yeah.
Yeah, commoditize. Thank you. Where were you 3 minutes ago when I needed that? But also what kind of destruction it can do to you. But I am curious about the shame aspect, because it seems like it might be hidden for a lot of men, where maybe they're having performance issues, or they're just feeling somewhat insecure in the bedroom, or maybe even inferior, or just a lot of insecurity, I imagine, about, hey, am I actually pleasuring this woman I'm with? Am I meeting her desires and needs? How do you know if that's rooted in shame and it might be uncovered and undiscovered?
I mean, I would say most of the time it is rooted in shame. You know, not necessarily from religion or porn use, but just this idea that, like, hey, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough for a woman or for love or for a relationship because I'm not performing like a porn star. So I think shame and guilt are inherent in that whole process, because the whole idea is like, oh, I didn't get it up last night. I hope that doesn't happen again, because that would mean I'm less than. I'm not a man. And so, yeah, I think shame is at the root of all of that.
Well, and if you have those issues, then you weren't able to get it up and perform. The next time, not only do you have that same issue, but now you're in your head even more, which I imagine just creates an even greater problem. So the question then is, as men are experiencing these insecurities in the bedroom, how do you begin to work through and overcome some of the guilt and shame about you performing or not performing? I don't even like to use that word. Performing is not the right word, but I think you know what I mean.
I know. Yeah, I don't like it either, but it is kind of the term that we use. I think the first part is understanding, like, one of the biggest mistakes that men make, like you said, when this anxiety perpetuates itself and just gets worse and worse, is they shame themselves for having the issue, you know? And what I would say is, like, everything around us is creating a process for us to have performance anxiety. So it would be really normal to be nervous and have anxiety during sex. So, like, most people do, men and women. So giving yourself that compassion of, like, okay, I'm not, you know, a loser. I'm not pathetic for having this. This is actually kind of normal. And the next step would be, you know, admitting that you need to make a change and work on it, right? Which takes a lot of humility. But the first step, and, you know, you mentioned safety earlier, what's happening in this whole mechanism is you don't feel safe during sex. There's anxiety around whether my body's going to do what I want it to do, whether I'm in my head or in my body and connected to myself. So the whole process is around creating safety in the bedroom for you.
You talk about, oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, I'm happy to kind of detail that whole process if you
Yeah,
want to.
I think we need to do that. I mean, you talked, one thing is you said admitting that you need to make a change. So I'm curious, what are those changes that you suggest men make? And then what is that process diving deep into what men need to do in order to improve
Yeah.
themselves, get out of their head, and then ultimately be able to perform and connect in the way that they want to have that intimacy?
Well, when I said men need to have the humility to say, hey, I need to make a change, because I think most men don't want to admit that they have this problem and they want to try and override it. They don't want to say, I fear having sex with my partner. I don't think anyone wants to say that. But
No.
no, that's not a good feeling, right? But okay, what can I do to cover it up? Can I take a pill? Can I, shuffle things around? Can I masturbate before? It's like all of these runarounds of how can I just band-aid the problem? And, those are the moments where I think men need to realize, like, wait a minute, actually, this is deeper. This is psychological. This isn't just some physical issue where I need to get my testosterone checked. I'm healthy. I'm actually just nervous and I'm in my head, which does take a lot. Whenever someone books a call with me, I'm impressed by the courage that they had to reach out to another man and talk about this issue for the first time in their life, right? Most of the men that I talk to are like, you're the first person I've ever told. I can't talk about this with anyone.
Right, because they're going to get ridiculed, mocked, belittled, all the things that they fear they will likely experience, for sure.
Potentially, right? I think the right friends would hold you in that, but it's not like a welcome topic of conversation for most friend groups. So in then getting help, part of my process is, again, we're creating safety in the body. And step one is just understanding and gaining awareness around your stress levels and being able to regulate yourself. So this has nothing to do with sex. It's your everyday life. And what is setting you off? And are you able to slow yourself down and be like, whoa, I'm dysregulated. I'm feeling panicked. Can I connect back to my breath and slow myself down? Because men who are 9 out of 10 stressed all the time, who then come home and, try to engage in intimacy at that level of stress, they're primed to have performance anxiety. Their
Sure.
body's in an ejaculatory state. They're either, if their fear is, I'm not going to get it up, then that's going to happen. If their fear is, I'm going to come too quickly, then that's likely going to happen. So reducing that baseline stress level and knowing how to create safety in your own body is step one, for sure.
And you're talking about being able to regulate specifically stress, other emotions you might be experiencing, that sort of thing.
Yes, by connecting to the breath. So that would just be maybe 5 to 10 belly breaths when you realize, like, it could be you're in traffic and someone cut you off and you're like, oh, I want to, and then, okay, I need to slow myself down. I need to relax because I'm about to like rip the steering wheel off and go absolutely ballistic, right? But I found myself. And then that's like step one of awareness, is realizing, wow, okay, through this week, these are the things that constantly coming up that are stressing me out. It could be, a phone call from your mother who needs help and she's overbearing, or, it could be a work thing, whatever it is, there's going to be a roadmap of things you need to work on that are stressing you out, and then using this tool to be able to regulate yourself. Now, step two would be moving that into your pleasure experience, because like we talked about earlier, most men grew up, masturbating to porn, watching a screen, sitting in a computer chair, and we need to completely rewrite that story. That pleasure isn't just ejaculation, that we can feel a lot more than just that. So creating that connection to the body and incorporating that same breath to move our sexual energy in a completely different way. So exploring touch outside of our genitals staying connected to ourselves. And that's one of the most confronting practices that I, have in my program, that men are just like, what in the world is this? This feels, feminine or, not manly, but it's a huge part of the process to connect to yourself.
What would that look like in practical application? Like, I don't really understand what that would. I mean, obviously, if you say masturbation, we all know what that is, but I don't know what it would look like to connect outside of that pleasure.
So when you say practical application, do you mean like the actual practice with yourself or practical in the bedroom with your partner?
Well, right now we're just talking step number 2, talking about getting familiar with yourself, correct?
Yes. So this would look like literally touching your body everywhere outside of your genitals with all different types of touch. So exploring what feels good for you outside of your genitals could be like, when I touch my neck, it feels nice. When I touch my nipple, whatever, my arm, but then different types of touch. So very soft touch, or maybe you like really strong touch or scratching. So it's this exploration of yourself to understand what you like. And what comes up and what I believe is coming up for you is like, well, why would I want to do that? Why would I touch myself?
Right. For sure. I'm sure there's a question you get all the time. I mean, the only thing I can think of right offhand is so you're more aware so that you could at some point communicate that with your partner.
Absolutely. Right. And understanding what feels good. And the number one thing that comes up immediately is shame. Why would I touch myself like this? It's girly. It's, for lack of a better word, from how I grew up, it's like, that's gay to do that.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with being gay, but that's so feminine and such a womanly thing to do. Like, no, just touch my penis and that's all I want. But we have access to so much more pleasure. And when you realize that you're shaming yourself for touching yourself, that's an important barrier to break. That, it's actually okay for me to do this. It's my body. Why can't I touch my chest? I'm not going to be doing it out in public, but like with myself, it feels amazing, But most men would be like, I'm not even going to allow myself to do that. That is too weird. Why would I want to do that to myself? But then you're missing out on a giant opportunity of connection to yourself.
Well, and I imagine also
and creating safety.
Well, also I would think with the being able to connect that way, that creates physical intimacy that doesn't need to only exist inside the bedroom, I imagine. So, for example, if your woman holds your hand the way you like her to hold your hand, or come up and give you a kiss on the back of the neck or something after work, or the way she puts her arm around, or whatever, right? And that creates little moments, I imagine, of physical intimacy that are disconnected from the actual act of sex that could potentially lead to that, but it makes it more well-rounded, I guess, maybe, satisfying.
I'll give you a great example. More connected, right? Because I'll give an example of me previously. Maybe I'm with a partner. She's kissing my chest. I know she's about to start to go down on me and touch my genitals. In my head, I'm thinking, just go down there already. I'm not connected to my experience at all. I'm just like trying to control and force with my head what's going to happen instead of being like, ooh, that feels nice. And touch me here, and, enjoying the tease and being connected to the entire experience, and then asking for different things. So for someone who has performance anxiety, this is giving you so much time to connect back to yourself and regulate before sex.
Well, I imagine also just the buildup and the anticipation of it. I mean, foreplay is a thing for a reason, right? It's the anticipation of what's going to happen that can get you excited and riled up, and I imagine help you perform better if that's been an issue or a struggle.
Yeah, it just feels amazing. Like you said, it's intimacy, it's connection, your partner, you touching yourself can feel great, and it can feel just as good as, when the woman you love is touching you. But that's really special when, your partner, your wife is touching you in a way that you love and she wants to do that for you. It's a very beautiful thing. And, you're in pleasure and now she's getting pleasure about you being in pleasure. That's just the way that I want to experience intimacy, and feels great for me.
I was going to ask you about that when you said you're in pleasure, she's in pleasure, you're in pleasure because she's in pleasure, which is great. Like it's a big cycle, right? And it should be that. It should be that way. I think both of you are there to, and this might be a really just blunt way to put it and maybe not do it justice, but you're there to serve her and she's there to serve you, and you're there to be served and she's there to be served. Like it should be all around, I think. But my question is, with men who have performance issues, anxiety issues in the bedroom, that sort of thing, do you feel like it's because they're focused too much on their own performance, or are they too heavily focused on making sure she's getting what she wants and needs at the expense of themselves?
Yeah, that's a very clear pattern that comes up, is like this nice guy mentality of, well, I'm terrified that I'm not going to be able to perform. So I'm just going to put all of my energy into her, give her as many orgasms as I can, and then, not even consider getting foreplay for myself and just kind of going in, doing my thing. Maybe it's quick. And then, kind of get out alive, basically, as opposed to really honoring their own wants and needs.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So it's just trying to find the balance between, hey, how do I make this woman I love and care about feel good? And also, how do I get what I need? How do I feel good with what I want too? Because I think it should be both.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that there's this like negative stigma that men with performance anxiety, are selfish because they go too quickly or something, but no man is intentionally doing that. Yeah.
Right.
Men don't, the average for men to last during penetrative sex is like 5 minutes, right? I don't think anyone's choosing to try and go as quickly as possible, except if you're having a quickie. So the intention is that we want to give our partner pleasure, and that's the goal. And the best way to do that, which is counterintuitive, is like you need to honor your needs in order to be able to be a good partner. So that nice guy mentality, like the intention is good. I just want to give her everything, but like you're not giving yourself a chance to have a good sexual experience. So your partner isn't going to feel that you're confident and in your body. And something I wanted to say when you mentioned that before is one of a woman's biggest turn-ons is knowing you are in pleasure because of her. So it's really important to honor these, what I spoke about earlier is like, hey, can you touch me here? And expressing that pleasure. Oh, that feels so good, and moaning and being expressive in how you communicate you're in pleasure. Because think about it this way. If your partner is screaming in pleasure, you're like, I know I'm doing a good job, right?
Yeah, it
Like
feels
I'm
good.
killing it right now.
Yeah.
And it energizes you. So most men, and myself included, like before I did this work, I was mute. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to communicate in the bedroom. I didn't express myself with sound. And knowing this, it's like it changes everything. When you lead by saying, hey, can you touch me here? And then expressing in pleasure, it shows your woman that, hey, she can ask for what she wants and needs, that's welcome, and that she can express her pleasure. So it just ramps everything up by honoring yourself, because the more connected you are to yourself, the more connected you can be to your partner.
I really do want to get into the communication thing. I imagine that's a pretty big barrier, being able to communicate what you want. Also, asking for feedback, I imagine, is something that a lot of men have a hard time with, and which I think is important. Not only listening to verbal cues and the way she moves, but just asking, like, do you like this? Do you like that? What about this? Do you want to try this? Like, we'll get to that in a second. I didn't want to deviate too far from the steps that you were talking about. So you said point number one was
Sure.
gaining awareness around stress and emotion. Number two was moving into a more well-rounded pleasure experience outside of just your genitals. That's what you had talked about as point number two.
Yep. Yeah. And then the next step, once you learn how to get out of your head and into your body and connect to your breath during pleasure, then you move that into sexual arousal with genital touch. So you're still connecting to that breath, but now you might start with that body mapping, that kind of foreplay of like, okay, I'm going to connect to my body, and then start with a technique called edging, which would be bringing yourself up to the point close to ejaculation and then slowing down and letting your arousal fall and then ramping back up again. So again, we're trying to create safety in those higher levels of arousal. Like, whoa, I'm about to ejaculate. That's okay. That's a normal place for me if I go to a certain level, right? And that's part of that process of learning your edge. If I take it too far, I'm going to put myself in a really bad position. So learning what is that threshold that feels completely safe and comfortable for you.
The threshold for ejaculating is what you're talking about. I imagine too that also it enhances your ability to hold out longer.
Absolutely. Right. So I think one of the biggest problems men make is they are already at a 9 out of 10 stress level. Then they try to engage in sexual activity. They're not connected to themselves. They start penetration and they're already at 90% to the point of ejaculation. And then they try and scramble. Okay, what do I do? What do I do? I need to pull out. I need to slow down. That's too far gone. Right? So you're not giving yourself a chance to have a good sexual experience if that's how you're engaging in sexual activity. What you need to do is, like we started with step one, if you're starting the sexual experience at a 5 out of 10, 6 out of 10, and then as you start penetration, you only go to like 70% to the point of ejaculation, then you're feeling good. You're not going, oh, no, I hope it doesn't happen. You're feeling calm. You're feeling collected. You're connected to your breath. And that's what we want to stay at. Like, I'm not saying you should be edging to 90% and come back down and do that during sexual activity with your partner. That's what we're learning during edging. And then when you do feel comfortable with that and you're like, I know my body. I know what I like. I know if I take it too far, it's too far. I know what's not far enough. So I know my sweet spot. And then when you carry that into the bedroom with the partner, it's simple. It's like, I've been here before. I know exactly what I need. Okay, I need to slow down a little bit. I need to get closer. I'm not going to just go hard and fast. And if I do want to do that, I'm going to make sure I'm at a certain connection to myself where it feels comfortable and safe to do that. Instead of, maybe your partner's going faster, I want it faster. And you're like, no, not now,
Right. Now's not a good time.
We'll just slow this down a little bit. Now's not a good time. And there's still plenty of other things that we can do that isn't going to like disrupt sex and the flow of sex and still make it extremely amazing and intimate. Maybe it's getting closer and slowing down and being more, intimate in that way versus this hard and fast. So
yeah,
once you know what your edge is, you can really play with your breath. Also, you modulate your breath where if you want to get closer to an ejaculation, then it's it's this fast, short breath pattern. If you're like at that moment where your partner's like, hey, faster, and you're like, no, I want to slow down. Then you slow it down. You can still be engaging in thrusting, but your breath is now slowing down. And that will put you back in the moment, back in control.
Yeah. Well, I like that, back in control, not necessarily control of her or anything like that, but in control of yourself by knowing yourself, knowing just familiarity. It's just practice, it's reps. It sounds so weird to say it in the context of what we're talking about, but that's all that is.
It's 100% that. And that's what I mean about creating safety again. It's like, I just did this for, 5 weeks straight. I know exactly what I want and need. I know my body. So when I get into the bedroom with my partner and the exact same thing is coming up, it's simple. I just need to slow down or I need to speed up. And that becomes comfortable. That becomes the normal.
Yeah. All right. So what's next? So we've got edging, and then was there something else to that?
Well, there is a little bit something after that, which is around removing the goal of ejaculation from your practice. So that shouldn't be the only goal of pleasure. And being able to get to that place of like, oh, this isn't like breaking that programming of pleasure equals ejaculation is really important. And that means there's nowhere to go. There is no performance. It's like, let me do a self-pleasure practice where let's just see what happens. Maybe I don't even get hard. Maybe I'm just touching myself, touching my genital. It feels good, but it doesn't have to result in an ejaculation. And that's a really important distinction to be able to make with your partner too. It's like, hey, this doesn't have to be this goal-oriented thing where it always has to result in you having an orgasm and me having an ejaculation. Like, we can just have a good time together and see what happens.
Yeah, I imagine it just takes that idea just takes the pressure off of men who feel so pressured to be like, hey, I got to perform and I got to get her off and I've got to get off or I didn't succeed.
Yeah. And that performance mindset just makes sex so serious to me. It's like, I have a job to do. I got to make my wife happy tonight, And it's like, maybe you've got other stuff going on and you have to switch on and be like, I gotta focus. I gotta make this happen. And I think that's a really normal place to be for most men, but it's actually very disconnected. That isn't the best place to be having sex from. And that's the place I was in for 15 years of my sexual experience. But being able to like cut that out and be like, hey, actually, let's just have fun. Let's see what happens. Let's completely remove any expectation and like laugh and smile during sex and see where it takes us. And that's when the most amazing things happen. That's when it usually ends up in orgasm and ejaculation anyway.
Of course. Yeah, of course. Well, and I think if you don't have that, if it's, I got to be serious, I got a job to do, which is funny because I'm sure, we laugh at it, but I'm sure a lot of men feel that way, right? I think at that point it becomes transactional and not wrong necessarily. You're still trying to be connected in some way, but it just takes, to your point, some of the real connection, intimacy, fun, excitement, novelty out of it, and it just makes it transactional. Let me get in, get you off, get myself off, and get out and go back to whatever we were doing, which sounds miserable most of the time. Not all of the time, but most of the time.
Yeah, and that's what I thought was good sex for a long time. She got hers, I got mine. That was the point. And we hit the goal. So like, hey, we're having good sex. And for anyone listening who's having that experience, there's nothing wrong with it. It just means I believe you have like 90% more pleasure potential that you haven't tapped into yet. So if anything, it's something to be excited about, that you can have so much more than that if you want to.
Yeah, makes sense. Let's get to communication. And I know probably broaching the subject for the first time, if a man has a desire, something. Maybe I imagine it's a spectrum, right? So it could be something simple like the way that she grabs you. Okay, I like this, I don't like that, too hard, too fast, whatever. And then there's the other side of it, which still is not wrong, but maybe you want to communicate something you want to do. Maybe it's role play or bondage or I don't know, whatever your thing is. So how do you begin to communicate what you want and desire from her? Because I think there's so many men that are just afraid of being rejected or it coming across as awkward and weird. So they just don't do it at all and never get what they want.
Yeah. I mean, it really depends on the context, right? It's like a pretty broad one, but I think of it like I'm single right now. So if I were to speak with a new partner and we were leading towards intimacy, like I would be talking about sex before we ever have it. To me, that's like the best possible way to understand if you want to give each other what you want and need. But if you're in a relationship and you're kind of, for the first time, mustering up the courage to ask for something new or ask to be touched, the first thing I would say is have that conversation outside of the bedroom. You don't want it to be like on the spot and have that pressure of your partner feeling like, oh, am I like supposed to do it right now? And then this is going to lead to, us having intimacy. That would be quite forced. So being able to do it like outside when you're, taking a walk or having a nice intimate moment together at a coffee shop or whatever, where it feels like you're connected already and be like, hey, by the way, I would love to talk to you about, the other night, what happened. I think one of the best ways to talk about sex is to like reinforce something that you loved. Hey, the other night when you did that thing, that was unbelievable. I loved it. I would love to do that more, Is there anything you like? What would you want? I think that's a really beautiful way to be able to do that.
It's human psychology at that point. If you acknowledge something that somebody has done well, assuming they love and care about you, they're definitely going to want to do that for you again. It's just human psychology, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it takes courage to do that, right? And I'm shocked sometimes, but I get it, where even reinforcing how much it means to you that your woman touched you in a certain way or did something for you feels foreign for a lot of men. Like, oh, that's so like mushy. I was thinking about it actually before this. There was a commercial back in the day. I forgot what it was, but it was like a beer can would drop on a guy's head if he said like he loved his wife, It was like, don't be like that. So there's this stigma that even saying like, hey, I loved it the way you touched me is like, icky and something that men wouldn't say, but it's really important to give that feedback. And even things like, I loved the way that you were in pleasure the other night. I love the way you moaned and I want to do that for you more. I want to see more of that. What gets you going the most? I want to give it to you. Like you said, right? When your partner wants to do something for you because they love you, that feels unbelievable. So like give that back to your partner as well.
Weird. To me, it seems like more often it would be that they don't ask because they're worried about perception or rejection or what she might think of him. Not, that feels weird, I don't want to do that.
It could be all of those things, right? And one of them, it could be that they feel like they don't deserve it. I don't feel worthy of asking, I don't even think she would want to do it. Could be an insecurity, especially from a lot of the nice guys that we were talking about, where it's like, my needs don't matter. I just need to give to her. So they really, really don't want to ask.
It's kind of fascinating to me too, because, for the amount of time that we've been doing this, I think men, generally, most men, really want to lead their wives. And I would say, generally, the overwhelming majority of women want to be led by a man who can lead. And if you're not communicating your wants, needs, desires, and things you want to try, then to me, that's a lack of leadership. That to me is a lack of masculinity, a lack of manliness, because I think a man is willing to cast vision, communicate effectively, give feedback, participate in the project. You know, you look at it and think, okay, well, at work I can do that. It sounds like it's the same thing in the bedroom.
Yeah. I'm really glad you said that, because I feel like some of the rhetoric online and like red pill stuff that can really confuse men is that like, you should know. You shouldn't have to ask. You shouldn't have to talk about it. You should just, as a man, know and just do it. Right. And it's like, that's not how I feel. That is completely like propping and being overly insecure about not being able to ask. So you pretend you know what you're doing, or you pretend you know what she wants. But yeah, to me, the leadership is in being able to say, hey, what is it that you want and need? Here's what I want and need. Let's give each other that. And being able to basically admit that you don't know everything. It's important.
Well, and it's not even really that big of a risk. It's just trying to, like, if you care about somebody, you just try to figure it out. I mean, you can listen to verbal cues, you can watch the way they move their body, and then you can also ask and use your words. But I also think when it comes to asking a woman what she's into, which I imagine a lot of guys would struggle with as well, to me, there would be a proper way to do it and an improper way. And it's all about your intent. So if you're asking a woman, hey, do you like this? Or how does this feel? Or do you like when we fill in the blank? If your intent is to get validation because you're worried about your own performance, I would say that's an insecure way to approach looking for feedback. But if you ask the same question, but your intent is because I want to make sure you're having your needs met too, that's a very secure way to approach that discussion. And the intent will be felt and heard and seen by the woman in your life, for sure.
Yeah, and I love that you're using that word, like intent. And for me, one of the big things is creating clarity of your intentions around having sex in general. I think most women just assume men want to have sex to get off. And that can create a really big problem in marriages and relationships when every time you try to initiate sex, your partner is just thinking, oh, you're just horny. It's like, no, it's important to communicate. Like, when I want to have sex with you, it's because I want to connect with you. I want to make love with you. I want to show you my love. So yeah, that intent says everything. How are you initiating sex? Are you giving her, the pleasure that she wants and needs? Or are you just trying to assume? Because asking and leading in that way is showing her how much you care about her pleasure, that you want to give her what she wants and needs, which is the best way to have intimacy and connection.
Do you feel like when men communicate that it's more than just getting off, that, for example, I want to connect, have you found that that the men that you work with feel like that's feminine or weak or gay or something like that, as opposed to just being the man and taking it to her?
I think that can be there for sure. But when, that usually comes up when they're not having a lot of sex already. So there's a problem when the intention is so clearly thought that, oh, he just wants to have sex to like use me to get off. That's a really bad place to be in, because then you might be having sex with someone who doesn't really want to have sex, but they're doing it for you. And over time, that just devalues the sex of the relationship, where you don't even really want it anymore because she's not into it. So that's when it needs a reframe. And at that point, I don't think most men are worried about that, because something needs to really change. It's like, hey, there's a clear disconnect in what you think I want and what we're having. And hey, this is what I really want out of our sex. And then it opens up that, way of communicating, like you said, that's, hey, what do you actually want? How do you want me to initiate sex? How do you want to be pleasured? And to me, that's leadership. That's not feminine.
Right. Yeah. Well, for sure. Yeah. It's just
Yeah.
interesting when, and I think that might be, as you said, a little bit of a manifestation of the ever growing red pill movement where, you know, if you were to ask a woman for her feedback or her opinion, then somehow you're devaluing your own, which is absolutely absurd.
Yeah.
You're not making yourself
Insane.
weak or less than by saying, hey, what do you like? The way you feel is important to me. I care about you. I want to make sure your needs are met too. In fact, to me, as men, leaders, fathers, husbands, everybody, our job is to make sure we're adding value to people's lives. And we need to know what's valuable to them. We don't get to decide, they do.
Yeah. To me, that's like the most manly way to show up in a relationship is to be vulnerable, to be open, to be the leader and having those conversations. That is creating safety. Like, hey, we can talk about anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this has been great, man. How do we connect more with you, learn more about what you're doing? Alex, I know you've got programs and you work with a lot of men all over on some of these issues, whether it's erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation, insecurity in the bedroom, and just feeling better about themselves. And of course, being able to have better sex.
Yeah, thank you. So the first place for men who aren't really struggling that much, but are looking for tips and want help, you could just check out my free YouTube channel, Alex Grendi. There's amazing stuff there that can help you improve your sex life, like basically immediately. But for men who are really struggling, and this has been something that's really affected your mental health and your relationships for years, the best way would be to check out my program and my website at alexgrendi.com. And we could hop on a call and see if we're the right fit to work together or if I can steer you in the right direction to get help.
Awesome. Well, Alex, I appreciate you. Thanks for coming and imparting some of this wisdom. It's like I said, we started this thing off where men just probably aren't talking about it enough. And so it creates all sort of disconnect and misunderstanding and confusion, which is, I think, not a good thing in the bedroom or any part of life. So I'm glad about the work you're doing. And I know you're helping a lot of guys. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I really appreciate you having me on and opening up this conversation because men don't know that they can do this. And it's a really powerful opening for men to now know, oh, there is a place I could get help. There is a resource. And that might lead them to, freedom in the bedroom and in their relationship. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, brother.